Hello, everyone. I just wanted to make another video talking about this app that I made called SoundGalore. It's just like a portfolio project that I'm making. In the last video, I talked a bit about the user side of things, how to make an account, how to make a post, how to leave comments, things like that. In this video, I'm going to talk more about the technical side of things. So I'm going to talk about the code, basically. So without further ado, here we go. So the stack for SoundGalore consists of React for JavaScript on the front end, with some CSS. Um, and actually the JSX is going to be there in place of most of the HTML, so we don't really have much HTML going on with this. Then for our server, we have a Flask server. So that's a framework for Python that lets you write server code in Python, just as you would PHP or another server language. And then on the back end, we're using SQLite. And I'm actually managing the SQLite using Python with a library called SQL Alchemy. So that would actually enable us to use the same Python code to manage our SQLite database as like an SSMS database. So the reason I chose to use SQL Alchemy is because if this app were to scale, we could change actually what type of database we're using without having to change any of the code or having to do any translation work. So that's why I decided on that. So without further ado on that, let's take a look at some of the code. So I'm going to talk about authentication first. So basically, the first step at looking at the authentication is how we're generating the password hashes. So I'm using this library called WorkZoog in order to set all these password hashes, and I'm using it inside of this database code. It's basically just SQLite but translated into Python. So this is going to give us the ability to generate our password hashes and also check those password hashes. So then inside of our backend, we just go through this process of checking the username, check the password hash using that WorkZoog, check if the email has been verified, and then we call this login user function, and that's going to actually start our session. This login user is provided as part of this Flask login utilities.py. But yeah, that's going to start our session. So now when we say credentials include in a request, is going to let us pass these like login required kind of walls. So we're able to access all of our own posts. We're able to access our account. Anything that the login was protecting, we're now in a session, so we can access those. So now that that's taken care of, the first screen the user would see is their user feed, which is this page over here. So there's a fair amount that goes into this page. Luckily, a fair amount of it is nested away into some other components that I wrote separately. So for example, the audio player right here, I wrote as a separate component, and then these comments down here, that's their own like and comment box component. So we're able to nest those within this overall component of user feed, which this component is more like a page. Technically, everything's a component in React, but the way I organized it, pages and components kind of as separate things. So yeah, here's the user feed. So first we have these state variables here, which we assign using useState. Basically, every time that one of these state variables in React gets reset, it will re-render the whole component. So that's nice because every time, for example, reset the posts using this set posts setter, we're going to see that reflected. We're going to see that actually displayed on the screen. So that's nice. These use refs right here, these are all creating refs in our DOM. So we can create them up here, and then in our JSX, which is basically just like HTML. And here we can use this ref equals to assign those references that we have in our JavaScript and interact with them using our JavaScript, which is nice. So the first thing that's going to run when the component mounts is this use effect. Basically, use effect will run after a component mounts, and then whatever you put after the return statement runs whenever the component unmounts. So that's why we have this cleanup code that's kind of unrelated seeming, because it's related to another piece of the code that we have, but this is just where we put cleanup code in React. Here we have the code that initially runs when our app mounts. So first we have constant fetch user, which we're getting from this request here, where we just get our current user. and then fetching the feed, we send this other request and it brings our feed, which is basically a list of posts. Then if we look at our database, I'll show you what the posts look like for a little bit more context. So here we have our post table in the database. So in here, in this return statement, you can kind of see the shape that it has, what our JSON that returns looks like. So you can see it, importantly, it has the image URL and it has the audio URL. So once we've gotten a response back from that request, we have what we need to give the components in order to display and render the right thing. So if we have the audio URL, we're going to be able to pass that as a prop, is what it's called, to this audio player, and then the audio player is able to know where it can access the audio file. So that's kind of how that's all tied together to display the feed there. So down here we have a few more helpers that help us with our user feed. So this one is fetch more posts. So that one basically does what it says, fetches more posts, and then it updates the page. Here we have another use effect. So this one's a little different because our dependency array, which is that little thing, up here it's empty, which means that it just runs when it mounts and unmounts. But if we put something in there, it will also run whenever that updates. So this little use effect, we're going to put separately because it has a different dependency array. Basically what this one handles is it loads more posts when the user gets to the bottom. So we have this observer, it's an intersection observer. And whenever the user's like screen intersects with this ref right here, this load more ref, then we're basically going to tell it to get more posts because we're out of posts, so we need more. This helper here is get centered post ID. So this one's important because we have this idea of an active post. So we want the user to be playing the sound that's from the post that's on their screen, if that makes sense. Like we don't want a post playing that the user has scrolled past and there's audio coming from it, but they've got to scroll up 50 posts in order to get it to stop. So in order to prevent things like that, we have the idea that whichever post is centered on the user screen is going to be the active post. So part of that logic is to get the centered post ID. It just looks at how far each of the posts are from the center of the user's client or bounding client rectangle, and makes the determination for which post is closest to that, returns that ID. Then we have this other helper that actually activates that post. Then we have this helper, which snaps to the next post. So this is just directly controlling the scroll behavior. Whenever it gets one of these scroll up or scroll down events, it's going to calculate how far it needs to go in order to scroll down and center the next post. And then we're going to use this scroll to method here and give it that value, this target top that we've calculated here to figure out where we need to scroll to. And then it's going to be a smooth scroll. And then we also set a timeout with that, which is why we have that cleanup up there, further up there for the like cleaning up the set timeout, because we don't want anything interrupting our scroll as we go up and down. We want it to just be like a smooth flick and it, animates up and down. But yeah, just consideration there. Whenever you have the set timeout, you also need to tear it down in your use effect. Here we have, this one's called handle feed scroll. Basically it handles like when you land on a post, kind of sets a timeout for a little bit before it activates the post to keep race conditions and things like that from happening. And then lastly, we have a helper for deleting a post from the database. So what that does is just sends this request to API/post with this delete method, and either deletes the post or returns an error. Then down here, everything after this return statement, basically we can think of that as like our HTML for the page. It's JSX, it's HTML-like, but yeah, it's the markup language you use for building these React components. So we have a div for the whole component. We have a div containing our header, which is also a component. It's in that file right there. We have a div here to hold like all the posts. Then we have like one for a specific post. And then we have this post card, which is like this actual little rectangle with curved edges there. And then inside of that, is where we have these other components, like our button, we have our audio player, and we have our like and comment box. Notice for the audio player, we're passing in this post as a prop, so that's how it knows where the actual link is for the audio that it's supposed to play. It has this is active prop, so that's how we set which audio player is going to be active and playing audio. And then besides that, it gets to the bottom of the page, there's no post to show yet, and then we have this load more ref. So this is just a place on the screen where when the user reaches it, we know that we need to load more posts. And so we saw that being used in the logic up there for when it loads more posts. And then, yeah, there's no more post to show if there's no more posts. Has no more posts is not. And that's basically the essence of this page. There's a little bit of obviously CSS going on, a little bit of control of some of the scroll behavior in order to help with, our kind of scroll interface is different from like the standard way that like a desktop website is usually working. This is kind of more designed for mobile, for swiping up and down. So there's some considerations there. Obviously, we have like things like Flexbox, setting things to display flex, or things that are in a Flexbox, setting their flex, grow, and shrink values. Yeah, just typical CSS stuff in here. Yeah, that's basically the user feed. Trying to think if there's anything else technical that I really want to talk about. I think that covers it for the most part. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to link out or reach out to me on LinkedIn or YouTube or anywhere else you can find my contact info. Ask me questions. I'm all ears. Thanks. Hope you enjoyed.